I was on my way out with Penny and the weather was nice, so I decided it would be a good day to go out to Heathmark. That's a national park which is only like 10 or 15 minutes from my house. As I pulled out of my driveway, it occurred to me that it would be a good place to record an episode of Hiking with Penny. One problem though, I had no idea what it would be about. So I asked myself, what do you want to think about? And that was it. That's actually a perfect topic. Confused? Okay, I mean the question, what do you want to think about, actually made me think about how we creative people have to steer our consciousness like this all the time. It's actually an important skill for creatives. We have to be able to conjure up ideas, let some go, and focus in on the ones of our choosing. In a way, we have to decide what to think as part of our jobs. And of course, we can get distracted or have a hard time focusing. But the thing is, when we get down to business, our creativity is a tool to direct our focus, to shift our perspective, and as strange as it sounds, to choose our thoughts. So this week, I want to get into the minds of creatives, how we direct traffic along neural pathways, and what the psychological benefits are to doing just that. Let's get started. Alright, I know it sounds a little far-fetched. Choosing our thoughts? Come on. Seriously? I'll admit it sounds a bit kooky. And this is not some positive psychology, just pretend everything's fine talk. Ideas are a kind of thought. So to get good at dealing with ideas, we need to learn to deal with our thoughts. But before we really get going here, if you're enjoying the video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up, and please go ahead and subscribe while you're at it. If you're new here, welcome to Keep the Flow. I'm Scott McLemore, a drummer and composer living way up north in Iceland, and I make these episodes every week to look under the hood of the creative process and keep our creative engines humming. I guess first we have to separate out emotions and thoughts. Obviously they're related and interconnected, and so that's not always going to be possible, but I'm not talking about choosing our emotions. However, unless we're going through something traumatic or suffering from depression, our thoughts are not usually tied to emotionally charged subjects. Usually. But creativity can also be therapeutic in those cases. And of course, I'm not the person you want to be listening to if you're experiencing trauma or depression. I mean, feel free to listen to me, but this is not medical advice. I'm just sharing my thoughts about creativity in the hopes that it might be helpful for others. However, we can have deep emotional connections to our work. It can feel like part of us. But the thought process that allows us to create the work is not emotional. And what I'm talking about here is easier said than done. I don't want to make it seem like this is something we can just snap our fingers and we're there. It's not. It takes work. To get there, we don't have to be monks. We can practice mindfulness, take notice of our thoughts. This is not necessarily about avoiding negative thoughts, but taking inventory and actively deciding where to put our focus. Writing things down helps too. Also, try combining ideas and looking for ways that they relate to each other and ways they contrast, making connections between the ideas and organizing them. Mind mapping is also good for this. Hello?
Do you want to watch Stranger Things?
Okay, can you give me like, 10 minutes and 15 minutes? Okay. The basic concept I'm talking about is often referred to as cognitive flexibility, which involves the ability to entertain potentially contradictory ideas and switch between different perspectives, as well as adapt to changing contexts. Sounds complicated, but it's not. There's been a ton of research done on this, and the benefits are undeniable. Better mental health, improved overall moods, and increased resilience, which is the feeling that things will work out, or a sense of control over our situation. I'm sure you've heard the term brain plasticity. Whenever I hear that, I think of plastic brain, which is totally not it. It's closely related to cognitive flexibility, but instead of psychological, it's physiological. It's also referred to as neuroplasticity. Anyway, brain plasticity is the physiological ability of our brain to change. which is also an effect of engaging in cognitive flexibility, which in turn makes cognitive flexibility easier. Just like stretching a muscle, our brain plasticity is enhanced by engaging in cognitive flexibility. The less we do it, the harder it is. Use it or lose it, you might say. Doing simple thought exercises is one way to increase cognitive flexibility. One exercise that is really easy to do is just asking, what if? What if this painting were upside down? What if this melodic phrase started on the second beat instead of the first? What if the back of this house was actually the front? Not that we need to pursue every weird idea, but it forces our brains to see things from another perspective, which opens possibilities that we hadn't considered. Or you could just watch a Christopher Nolan film. That'll flex your cognition. But what about choosing more than one thought to focus on? Is that multitasking? Can we learn to work on multiple projects at once? We'll get into that next. In 1965, IBM introduced a phrase into our collective psyche: multitasking. Their computers were supposed to be capable of doing more than one thing at a time. It was a big deal. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, we humans picked up the phrase and started applying it to ourselves. After all, our brains are basically like supercomputers, right? They should be able to do more than one thing at a time. We should be able to multitask, no problem, right? Piece of cake. Except no, we can't. Not really. We can do what's called context switching, which is just switching back and forth between different tasks, sometimes very quickly. But something is lost in the process. Our attempts at multitasking lead to mistakes, stress, burnout, wasted time, and way too many traffic accidents. But as a musician, when I sit down to play, and each of my limbs are doing something different, is that not multitasking? No. Coordinated movements are just that. Even when we hear somebody improvising on the piano with both hands, both of the hands are collaborating towards a common goal. It's not the same as if one hand is ironing a shirt and the other hand is filing a tax form. Two things I'd try not to do anyway. But still, even with an improvising musician, there is a rapid back and forth of focus going on. However, context switching is what most people mean when they say multitasking. Trying to do multiple things at once, but really just going quickly back and forth between them, and inadvertently burning the food, or missing the turn, or sending a text message to the wrong person. I once sent a student a text message asking if they would like me to pick something up at the store. I was grateful that it wasn't something more embarrassing than that, but I know it happens. And I'd love to hear about your own misadventures with multitasking in the comments. We could all use a laugh. However, as creative people, we can actually benefit from having many irons in the fire, so to speak. Having multiple projects active at the same time allows us to diversify our output, but it also gives us opportunities to hop into a different project if we feel stuck in the current one. We can also get inspiration from one project that applies to another. For instance, when I'm composing, I have between 3 and 5 pieces that I'm actively working on. There are times when an idea that I'm working on for one piece suddenly seems like it fits better with another piece. And there are times when I realize 2 pieces that I'm working on are actually the same piece, and I'll merge them somehow. But this is not multitasking. Yes, these are multiple tasks, but I'm not trying to do them at the same time. That would be insane. When I sit down to write, I have to choose which piece to work on. Same thing with these episodes. I have multiple ideas for podcast topics open in my writing app. Usually there's one that I'm thinking about more than the others, but if I feel stuck, instead of just not writing, I can scroll through my other ideas, and usually one will jump out at me. Learning to increase our focus and avoid multitasking will also strengthen our ability to steer our consciousness. When we come back, we'll get into the importance of environment when it comes to choosing our thoughts. Thanks for sticking with me. If you're enjoying the video, there's a tiny thumbs up button down there somewhere. You should definitely hit that and then subscribe and hit the bell because I'm putting out videos like this every week. There's a lot of research that goes into these episodes, which involves listening to podcasts, watching videos, and if all else fails, reading. I know, it's archaic, but there are still people out there who insist on writing books. And so to deal with that, one of the tools I've been using from even before I started Keep the Flow is Blinkist. Blinkist summarizes nonfiction books by chapter into digestible portions that give you the main concepts quickly and concisely, and you can even listen to them on the go. I'll listen to these when I'm driving or when I'm walking Penny, which, wait, does that qualify as multitasking? I don't see this as a replacement for reading a whole book, but it helps me find the books that I want to read and skip the ones that I don't. Why waste time and money buying a book only to get a few chapters in and realize it's not for you? Right now, Blinkist is offering 70% off or 9 months free with my link in the description, or just go to blinkist.scottmclemore.com. And now, back to Keep the Flow. If we're surrounded by distractions and constantly reacting to something, people are asking us questions, the washing machine just finished, I better put that load of clothes in the dryer. Speaking of clothes, should I buy another pair of those pants that I just ripped a hole in last week? Did anyone feed the dog? This is kind of how my mind works unless I take steps to prevent it. But if we find ourselves in an environment that is full of distractions, we're going to have a hard time focusing on our work and a hard time choosing what to focus on. Being distracted is exhausting. Even if you're not neurodivergent, being distracted takes a toll on our mental health. Every time we hear a little ding on one of our devices, we get a jolt of a stress hormone called cortisol and go into fight or flight mode for a millisecond. It's so common now that we hardly notice it, but it still happens. Basically, all the psychological benefits of creativity are the opposite of what you get from all the ding, beeps, or whatever sound your phone makes. Stress and anxiety, loss of focus, less productivity, depression, and burnout. But it doesn't have to be that way. I turned off most of my notifications. I like the option on iOS devices of having a summary for notifications at certain times during the day. I have mine set for once in the morning and once in the evening. However, I left on notifications for text messages, which I don't really get much of these days, but when I do, they're usually important. Social media and other stuff gets put in the summary. This seems to work pretty well for me. Other distractions can be dealt with by having a dedicated space, an office or studio, that is separate from your living space. We need to create a space for ourselves that is conducive to being in the flow state, somewhere we can get in the zone. Once the distractions are minimized, we have access to the mental bandwidth needed to choose our thoughts, to choose what to focus on. Sometimes going out for a walk is the best solution. If it's a nice day, finding a nice park bench to sit down and clear your mind can be the best work environment. Some people like working in cafes, which I totally get. The idea of that is really appealing to me, but I think my autism makes that a no-go. Whenever I've attempted this, I'm just hyper aware of everything that's going on around me. But whatever environment we find works for us is the right one. We just need to be honest with ourselves about what we need to get to that flow state and try to recreate that environment as often as possible. This is not where I do most of my work. Yes, this is where the recording happens, but as far as the writing goes, that's usually in my sofa or in bed or at the dining room table, in my car, while I'm out hiking with Penny. See the link in the description for pretty much wherever ideas come to me, I try to be open to them. But for my composing and practicing, these days, most of that happens at the art school where I teach. I try to show up early on the days that I teach and get some time on the piano and the drums before the lessons start. At that time, I'm usually the only person in the building. There's no washing machine, no dishes in the sink, nobody asking me anything. It's just me and the instruments. And I ask myself, What do I want to think about today? So I guess if there's one thing that I would want you to take away from this, if you're still watching that is that this takes work. Getting a hold of our consciousness, of our idea factory, is going to take work. But the more we do it, the easier it gets. And as usual, I don't want to give anyone the impression that I have all this together. I don't. But I'm aware of it, I'm working on it, and it feels like I'm making progress. And I guess that's the most any of us can hope for. That's all I've got for today. Thanks so much for hanging out. Please take a moment to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. And stop by my Patreon page to catch up on Hiking with Penny. I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep the flow.